There are encounters. They may seem very ordinary when we are young. However, they can change our entire youth. And hello everyone. Welcome back to Oni-chan. Today, Oni will bring to you a very heartwarming movie. It tells the story of young love. Starting from an ordinary convenience store, it became the place where colorful love stories began. This movie highlights both friendship and love, though these are just simple, ordinary moments. When we look back, they are truly precious. To see how magical this convenience store really is, let's wait together with Oni-chan. The story begins with two boys. Haruki and Toa are best friends. They have been playing together since childhood. Yesterday, Toa stayed overnight at Haruki's house. However, he ended up sleeping on the floor. When Toa woke up, his neck hurt badly, but it turned out that Haruki didn't want to share the bed. After that, the two of them went to school together. Since there was an exciting soccer match tonight, Toa would stay over at Haruki's house again. But Haruki was worried that Toa's mother wouldn't allow it. However, Toa managed to persuade her. Today, their school was hosting many club activities. They could freely join whatever they liked. At that moment, Haruki and Toa met the student council president. His name was Mikado. However, Haruki felt uneasy. He was afraid that he would catch Mikado's attention. Surely, that would only bring trouble for Haruki. A little while later, Haruki went home. Since he had already signed up for a club, Haruki stopped by a nearby convenience store to wait for Toa. At that time, a girl sat next to Haruki. Her name was Miharu. Unexpectedly, she was someone Haruki had known before. Haruki had always admired her from afar. Perhaps Haruki had a special feeling for Miharu. That's why he felt nervous now, because he had the chance to be close to Miharu. Suddenly, Miharu had a small accident. Haruki noticed it, so he immediately stepped in to help her. And then Miharu gave Haruki a small gift. She wanted to use it as a way to say thank you. Just then, Toa arrived. He observed their interaction. This time, Toa directly asked Haruki, why didn't he confess to Miharu? That question left Haruki feeling confused. But it was all because of Haruki himself. He didn't have enough courage to confess to Miharu. When night fell, even though Toa had already fallen asleep, Haruki was still deep in thought. He recalled a childhood memory related to Miharu. The next morning, the two of them went to school together again. After that, they stopped by the convenience store. Unexpectedly, Miharu was also there, so Toa found it amusing. After he witnessed the situation, Toa decided to follow Haruki around to tease him. A little while later, it was time for the break. Haruki was having lunch on the rooftop. Meanwhile, Toa and his friends were chatting together. Suddenly, the class president appeared. Her name was Mihashi. It seemed that Toa also had a slight crush on her. However, Mihashi was angry, because Toa had caused trouble in the previous lesson. So Mihashi left the room right after. Suddenly, she accidentally bumped into Miharu. That made Miharu drop all of her belongings. However, Miharu still asked with concern. She even knew Mihashi's name. That made Mihashi very surprised. It turned out that Miharu had known her before. So the two of them started talking and getting acquainted. Because of that, they had the chance to understand each other better. At that moment, Miharu felt very happy, since she had always wanted someone to confide in. And Mihashi felt the same way. A little while later, after school ended, everyone went home, but Haruki and Toa stayed behind to attend their club activities. After finishing, Toa went home alone. By chance, he met Mihashi at the convenience store. So Toa quickly ran up to greet her. However, Mihashi left right after because she felt shy. But Toa ran after her to ask, why did she always avoid him so much? Toa thought maybe it was because he often did weird things. And that was indeed true. However, Mihashi also had a small misunderstanding about Toa. She thought that cute things weren't meant for her. At least, that was what Toa believed. But then, Toa suddenly told her that Mihashi was actually very cute. However, Toa didn't understand why she was so embarrassed. He even repeated it many times. And that was exactly what made Mihashi so shy. After that, she became flustered and immediately ran away. As for Haruki's story, it turned out that when he was little, he used to play happily with Miharu. Sometime later, Miharu gave Haruki a book as a keepsake. And after that, Miharu left. Since then, they lost contact with each other. But Haruki still remembered Miharu's name, because on the back of the book, her name was written. When Haruki entered middle school, he happened to hear that same name again, Miharu. And it was the girl who had just transferred to his school. From that moment on, Haruki always watched Miharu from afar. Returning to the present, everyone was on their way to school. Haruki and Toa stopped by the convenience store. There, Toa was annoyed about what had happened yesterday. Haruki thought Towa's actions were no different from him harassing Mihashi. However, Toa didn't see it that way. He thought it was something completely normal. After that, the two of them went to school. Haruki was worried about Toa, especially about his relationship with Mihashi. Haruki feared that Toa would get into a lot of trouble because of this. However, Toa thought this wasn't a problem. So after that, he took the initiative to talk to Mihashi. Unexpectedly, she ignored Toa, so Toa immediately ran after her. He thought Mihashi was still sulking. So Toa quickly apologized, because he didn't realize the things he had done. But that was exactly the reason Mihashi disliked him. She thought Toa was a careless person. He often acted without paying attention. During the break, Mihashi was in the library with Miharu, sharing her thoughts. The two of them were talking about Toa. She said he really hadn't changed and was even worse than before. However, Mihashi still seemed to misunderstand Toa. Because, as Miharu observed, even though Toa was popular in class, he often tried to talk to Mihashi. And Toa would also help Mihashi whenever she was in trouble. Miharu laughed, thinking they looked like characters in a manga. However, Mihashi didn't like that type of guy. She only liked boys who were intelligent. At that moment, Miharu found out that Toa had a close friend named Haruki. So Miharu immediately went to Haruki, because she wanted to ask him for more information about Toa. However, Haruki was extremely flustered at that moment. Even when he was swimming at his club practice, Haruki kept thinking about it in his head. After he finished training, he immediately ran to the place where he was supposed to meet Miharu. At that time, Mihashi was also there. Since Mihashi and Miharu had something to discuss, they wanted to ask Haruki for advice. After Haruki listened to everything, perhaps he understood part of the situation. At that moment, he thought Mihashi and Miharu might have misunderstood Toa, because the Toa that Haruki knew might be a little strange, but he was kind-hearted and often helped others. That evening, when Haruki went home, Miharu ran after him to thank him for their meeting earlier that day. As for Toa, he had gone to Haruki's house, while Haruki was waiting in his room to have a serious talk with him. This conversation was about Mihashi. Afterwards, Haruki revealed that he had talked to her today, and Mihashi complained that Towa's daily actions always caused her more and more trouble. This left Toa feeling disappointed. Haruki thought Mihashi didn't like Toa. However, Toa didn't believe that was the truth. He only complimented Mihashi for being cute in front of her, because Towa's only intention was to get closer and have the chance to become friends with Mihashi. But perhaps it had the opposite effect, because of Towa's carefree words and actions. Still, he was better off than Haruki, since Haruki didn't even dare to greet Miharu directly. And so, the two of them ended up in a heated argument. When it was time to sleep, Toa never expected Mihashi to be that angry. This time, he didn't know what to do next. However, Toa still truly liked Mihashi, because he enjoyed seeing Mihashi's changing emotions. Sometimes Mihashi looked a little sad, then suddenly angry. Occasionally, she was very gentle, but at times, Mihashi could also be scary. No matter what, Toa would continue to like her. The next morning, Haruki helped Toa go and talk to Mihashi. It turned out that Toa only wanted to be friends with her. But because Toa couldn't control himself, he often made others feel uncomfortable. This time, Toa sincerely apologized to Mihashi, and he took the initiative to shake hands and make peace. And with that, all the conflicts came to an end. The atmosphere among the four of them had become much better. After that, they all went home together. Many days later, because Haruki was late for school, he hurriedly ran as fast as he could. Unexpectedly, Haruki accidentally bumped into Asumi. Luckily, both of them were fine. So Haruki quickly rushed into his classroom. Before class started, Toa came to Haruki to tell him something. Earlier, he saw Miharu. She was walking with another boy. The two of them were talking quite happily. From Haruki's perspective, they seemed rather close. However, Haruki didn't care about that at the moment. He thought he was just overthinking it. After that, Haruki simply went back to his classroom. At that time, while Haruki was sitting with Mihashi, suddenly, he spotted the very boy who had been talking to Miharu that morning. So Haruki decided to run after him. Meanwhile, the person Haruki had bumped into earlier was currently being bullied by others because Asumi refused to follow their ridiculous demands. At that moment, a girl named Manoa noticed it, so she rushed over, intentionally interrupting them. Fortunately, Mikado's group arrived at that moment. They were members of the student council. This made the bullies frightened and run away. On Tawa's side, he and Mihashi happened to see Itokawa. She was in the cooking club at the time. However, since the club had few members, Itokawa invited Toa and Mihashi to try some dishes. At that moment, Sanagi was also there. Unexpectedly, he was the president of the club. Perhaps that was why the dishes made by Sanagi tasted so delicious. Afterwards, Sanagi hurried outside because he had something urgent to do. On Haruki's side, he and Asumi were members of the club led by Mikado. Since the school sports festival was approaching, Mikado still lacked enough people to help. So he wanted Haruki and Asumi to lend a hand together. Both of them could come here during every break, as well as after school hours, to support Mikado's group. Therefore, Mikado placed high hopes on them this time. Returning to Toa, he and Mihashi were following Sanagi, because Mihashi wanted to know clearly who he was. Unexpectedly, the two of them were discovered by Sanagi. As for Haruki, he was diligently working according to the assigned plan. At that moment, Haruki was trying to get closer to Asumi. However, both of them were quite quiet. So this time Haruki took the initiative to start a conversation. He knew that Asumi's track team was facing many problems. Perhaps in the near future, Asumi would encounter many difficulties. However, he didn't really care about that matter. Asumi joined the club just for the sake of running. It turned out Haruki was the same. He joined the swimming club only because he could swim. And Asumi was quite impressed with Haruki's skills. After they talked with each other, they realized they shared something in common. When a person does something they truly love, they cannot think about anything else. In the end, Haruki and Asumi finished their work. After that, the two of them headed home. However, since it was raining heavily, Asumi went home first. Meanwhile, Haruki quickly ran to a convenience store. He wanted to buy an umbrella to go home. Unfortunately, Haruki didn't have enough money to pay for it. Luckily, Miharu appeared just in time. She helped Haruki out this time. So Haruki was very grateful for her kindness. After that, Haruki had the chance to walk home together with Miharu. On the way, the two of them had some time to talk with each other. At that moment, Haruki grew curious. He wondered if Miharu currently had a boyfriend or not. But she immediately denied it. Miharu had never had a boyfriend. Suddenly, the atmosphere between the two of them became quiet. Meanwhile, Toa and Mihashi had spent a whole day investigating. So they had already learned the situation clearly. At that moment, Mihashi went home first. Afterwards, Toa called Haruki to explain everything. It turned out Sanagi had gone to the hospital to see a doctor. As for Miharu, he only talked with her for a few minutes. What was special was that Miharu was still single. But Haruki had already known that before. However, he was surprised, because Toa had followed Sanagi around the whole day. This made Haruki feel helpless. Yet he was still very happy, because Miharu was still single. The next morning in class, since the school sports festival would be held soon, everyone in Mihashi's class signed up to participate. However, for the last event, everyone refused. So Toa decided to participate. And he also invited Mihashi to join together. At that time, she couldn't refuse. So Mihashi had no choice but to accept this matter. However, Toa encouraged her a lot. But Mihashi was still very afraid that she wouldn't be able to do it. She thought she would affect the results of the class. At that moment, Toa didn't want things to turn out that way. So he wanted to practice together with Mihashi. That way, they could achieve good results this time. Afterwards, everyone went to the training place. However, Tawa's schedule was a bit complicated. This made Mihashi feel a little confused. But Toa believed that she could do it, if the two of them worked hard together to complete it. Since everyone was exhausted from training, Miharu thoughtfully brought food for everyone. As for this sports festival, Miharu would not participate. It turned out she could not take part in physical activities. However, Miharu would still cheer for everyone. But Mihashi and the others all knew. Perhaps Miharu also really wanted to train together with them. Yet, because of her health condition, Miharu couldn't join the others. That was why Mihashi wanted to train seriously this time. Meanwhile, Miharu stayed in the club and tried making small gifts. They were meant to be given to the classmates participating in the sports festival. They served as a kind of spiritual encouragement for everyone. Day after day, Mihashi kept training hard together with Toa. And with Toa's encouragement, she also made some progress. The two of them kept working hard on this. Meanwhile, Haruki stayed at school to do student council work. However, Asumi was absent because she was busy. So Haruki had a heavy workload. But when he saw Miharu from afar, all of Haruki's fatigue gradually disappeared. As for Mihashi, even though she tried hard to practice, Mihashi was still shy when standing next to Toa. However, Toa did not avoid her because of that. He would continue whenever Mihashi was ready. And then the two of them tried once more. As a result, everything went smoothly just as Toa had imagined. He thought that he was bound by destiny to Mihashi. However, Mihashi believed that Toa had a problem, because he always said such silly things. But in any case, Miharu wished them good luck. After that, the two of them went home first. The next day at school, Asumi and Haruki continued their daily work, while Toa kept practicing enthusiastically with Mihashi. After many days passed, finally, the school sports festival was held. Miharu gave each of her friends a lucky charm, because she hoped that everyone would have a smooth competition. Unexpectedly, everyone really liked Miharu's meaningful gift. When it was almost time for Toa and Mihashi's event, Mihashi felt a little nervous. But Toa immediately encouraged her, because Toa believed that the two of them would win, thanks to their hard practice beforehand, and also because of Miharu's lucky charm. Mihashi felt less worried this time. With the power of belief, Toa's team won the match. Both of them were satisfied with the result. After the sports festival ended, Haruki and Miharu went home together. On the way, Haruki thanked her for the charm. And Miharu was also very happy about this sports festival, because until now she had never participated in any festival. But thanks to everyone, Miharu had the chance to experience it. Suddenly, heavy rain started pouring down, so the two of them had to find a nearby place to take shelter. At that moment, the atmosphere between them became a bit awkward. After many days, the National Sports Festival for high schools was held. Haruki never expected Asumi to be so outstanding. She had already participated for 2 consecutive years. At that moment, Miharu and Mihashi also appeared. Haruki didn't know how Toa managed to invite Mihashi. It turned out that because of their victory in the previous sports festival, which was largely thanks to Toa, Mihashi wanted to do something for him. So Toa was able to arrange for Mihashi to come here. After the National Sports Festival ended, everyone went home together. Miharu thought that the students at school would make a big congratulatory banner for Asumi, because of her glorious victory earlier. Afterwards, Toa planned to go home together with everyone. However, Mihashi immediately refused. Even though Toa tried hard to persuade her, Mihashi still wanted to go home alone. So Miharu chased after her. At that moment, she thought that something must have happened between Mihashi and Toa. So Mihashi went to Miharu's house to talk things over. Mihashi thought that she needed to focus on her studies. At present, Mihashi did not understand herself. She suddenly had an indescribable strange feeling. At that moment, Mihashi remembered the time she collided with Toa, when the two of them were still practicing for the previous sports festival. However, Miharu at that time thought that perhaps Mihashi had started to notice Toa. But Mihashi immediately denied it, because she thought that it was impossible. At that moment, Miharu suddenly laughed. She thought this was something completely possible, because Toa was not a bad person at all. For example, earlier Toa was very worried about Mihashi, but perhaps Mihashi still couldn't accept this matter. After many days passed, Toa learned that there would be a fireworks festival on the weekend. So he called Mihashi. Toa wanted the two of them to go watch it together. However, Mihashi refused his invitation. This made Toa feel disappointed. As for Mihashi, she didn't know what she should do. Then the next day, when Mihashi went out for a walk, She saw everyone happily going out together. This made Mihashi feel a little sad inside. Meanwhile, Toa kept practicing hard. However, it seemed he still felt disappointed, because Mihashi had rejected him the day before. Afterwards, Toa went to a convenience store. Coincidentally, Miharu was also there, so the two of them had a chance to talk with each other. At that moment, Toa felt extremely jealous, because of Miharu and Mihashi's closeness. But Toa thought that maybe Mihashi really hated him. At that moment, Miharu had no choice but to share her own thoughts. Mihashi actually understood the situation very well. However, she simply didn't have enough courage to accept it. Unexpectedly, Toa seemed to realize something, so he ran with all his strength to Mihashi's place. Luckily, the two of them met. At first, they both remained silent. Suddenly, Mihashi thought that everything Toa did was just playing around with her. However, Toa disagreed with Mihashi's assumption. All this time, Toa had truly been serious about her. Suddenly, a group of female friends who knew Toa invited him to hang out with them. Seeing this, Mihashi walked away, so Toa immediately chased after her. He didn't know what Mihashi was thinking, but even she herself didn't know. Mihashi only asked Toa not to bother her anymore, because Mihashi was not as simple as other girls, and she always felt insecure about herself. However, Toa did not hate those things. He thought that what mattered most was Mihashi herself. Just that alone was already enough. Unexpectedly, Toa admitted that he really liked Mihashi. And then he asked about Mihashi's feelings. But perhaps the feelings between the two of them are beginning to blossom. The next day arrives. Haruki and Toa are on their way to school. The Aozora festival is coming soon, so Toa thinks there will be a lot to do in the coming days. After that, Haruki continues his swimming practice as usual. Meanwhile, Mihashi is at the library together with Miharu. Suddenly, Toa appears. He quickly walks over to Mihashi. This makes her feel flustered. However, Toa wants to discuss the Aozora festival with Mihashi, but she is still very shy in front of Toa. So Mihashi ends up pulling Miharu away. This leaves Toa a little confused. Mihashi thought that all the past misunderstandings between them had already ended. Unexpectedly, their conflict is still ongoing. It turns out Mihashi feels that everything before happened too suddenly, so she has not been able to adapt to it yet. At this moment, Miharu immediately encourages Mihashi. At the very least, Mihashi does feel something toward Toa. After that, Mihashi becomes curious. She asks whether Miharu is interested in someone. But Miharu becomes flustered and hesitant, because she is still unsure about this matter. A little while later, the school day ends. Miharu asks Haruki to go to the convenience store together. On the way home, Miharu suddenly wonders, if someone starts paying attention to another person, she doesn't know what kind of feeling it would bring. However, Haruki has no idea what Miharu is talking about. So Miharu becomes flustered at that moment. She then asks Haruki in return. She doesn't know whether Haruki is interested in someone or not, but he doesn't dare to answer. When he gets home, Toa feels helpless at Haruki's foolishness, because he thinks that was Haruki's best chance to confess his feelings to Miharu, since only the two of them were together at that time. However, Haruki still doesn't have enough courage to do so. But according to Toa, if Haruki misses this chance, then other boys will have their opportunities. At that time, Toa believes everything will fall apart. However, Toa's situation isn't any better. Mihashi has run away from him, so at present, Toa also has no hope left. After several days, preparations for the Aozora festival are underway. Haruki happens to meet Miharu on the street, so the two of them walk home together. While they were resting by the roadside, Miharu showed Haruki a book, one that she was deeply fond of for its fresh and unique content. At that moment, Haruki was full of admiration for it, because this was truly Miharu's area of expertise. Haruki thought that she was amazing, which made Miharu blush. At that moment, she shared that ever since she was little, she had loved colorful books. Miharu could even read them every single day, and her dream was that someday, she could write her own story with her own hands. This surprised Haruki. Suddenly, he mentioned The Mermaid Prince, a book full of memories between the two of them. However, Miharu didn't realize it at that time, so Haruki intended to confess everything. But since he still didn't have enough courage to say it, Haruki hurriedly ran back home. The next day at school, Haruki let out a sigh of relief, because he and everyone else had finished their part of the festival preparations. However, they were still working on the final touches to make the Aozora festival even more grand. By the time night fell, everyone had wrapped up their work. At this moment, Toa created an opportunity for Haruki and Miharu to walk home together. Before the two of them headed back, Miharu wanted to stroll around and look around, since tomorrow they would surely be busy. So the two of them watched everyone preparing for the stage performances. Miharu believed these would become special memories. After that, the two of them went to the book exhibition room. Unexpectedly, there, Miharu found her favorite childhood book. Haruki also took this chance to share that it was the very first book he had ever read. That book had been introduced to him by another girl, and she had given it to Haruki as a gift. Of course, that was also a very special memory for him. At that moment, Miharu might have realized something. The next morning, the Aozora festival began. However, Miharu did not participate that day, because after hearing Haruki's heartfelt words the day before, Miharu had immediately walked away. Until now, Haruki still doesn't know the reason why. He thinks that last night he might have said something wrong. At that moment, Toa was surprised, since he didn't think Haruki would dare to confess. But the result didn't seem to go smoothly. However, he also understood Haruki's feelings, because Toa himself had already gone through it before. After many days, today the school held the student council election. However, Toa had no interest in this matter, because he saw how hard the seniors worked for their duties. At that moment, Haruki passed by Miharu's classroom, and suddenly saw her laughing happily with her friends. This made Haruki unconsciously smile along. However, he quickly left right after that. As for Mikado, he was busy with the final tasks. At that moment, Kazaki entered the room. She worked together with Mikado in the student council. After that, Kazaki was extremely surprised at Mikado's messy workroom. However, that was the reason he could keep working. This was truly strange. Even Mikado himself knew that he was like that. This made Itokawa greatly admire Masamune, because he was able to work alongside Mikado. Masamune truly was someone good at enduring. Of course, the same went for Kazaki as well. A while later, Masamune also arrived. He was curious why Kazaki was there. It turned out that she wanted to go home together with Mikado as soon as he finished. However, Mikado thought it might take a while. So when he finished his work, he would call Kazaki. After that, she went home. Masamune was surprised by Kazaki's enthusiasm. She truly was a kind-hearted girl. Even Mikado agreed with that. That night, before Mikado returned home, he stopped by Kazaki's house, since the two of them were neighbors and also childhood friends. However, at that time, Kazaki had dozed off at the table. The next morning, Mihashi was together with Toa. She didn't know how things were going between Haruki and Miharu. It turned out Miharu hadn't told Mihashi anything. So Toa revealed that part of it was his fault, because he had interfered in their relationship. However, Mihashi thought only the people involved could truly understand the problem. As for Haruki, he was heading to the student council room, because Haruki didn't know if they needed his help. But for Masamune, the best way Haruki could help Mikado was by running in the election. However, Haruki thought that was impossible, since his class already had a strong candidate, Kazaki. Unexpectedly, Kazaki also did not run for the election, because she was very shy about it. Even though everyone knew Kazaki was close to Mikado, they still had to accept it, since that was Kazaki's choice. It turned out that her classmate thought if Kazaki joined the election, then Mikado could leave with peace of mind, and Kazaki would no longer be able to see him again. After Kazaki heard the news, she hurriedly ran to Mikado. After that, the two of them had a serious conversation, although Mikado didn't know who had told Kazaki. In the near future, Mikado would be moving to another place, and he had always planned for it a long time ago. However, Kazaki couldn't understand why Mikado refused to tell her about something this important. At that moment, Kazaki couldn't hold back her emotions, because in the future, the two of them would no longer meet. They wouldn't be able to share their fears together. They wouldn't even be able to eat together anymore. But as for Mikado, he had always been watching over Kazaki all this time. Mikado had stayed by her side and protected her. However, Kazaki still didn't understand that. For a long time, Mikado had no longer seen her as just a little sister. In fact, Mikado had truly fallen in love with Kazaki. At that moment, she was shocked by what had just happened. So Kazaki ran away, leaving Mikado there alone. Everything continued on as usual. But Mikado's health seemed to be worsening. So Haruki was very worried about him. Yet at this point, Mikado didn't know how to face Kazaki. Perhaps their relationship would gradually get worse. When Haruki was at school, he happened to run into Kazaki. So the two of them spent some time talking. No one knew what they discussed. But when Kazaki got home, she kept recalling the moments between herself and Mikado. It seemed to leave her feeling uncertain, and she couldn't accept the present reality. The next morning at school, Kazaki unexpectedly joined the election as a candidate. Even Mikado was surprised at her decision. Masamune thought that perhaps Kazaki was doing it for Mikado. Although Mikado didn't show his emotions outwardly. But Haruki knew that deep down, Mikado was very happy. As for Toa, since he always paid attention to Mihashi's interests, he took Mihashi to a nearby pastry shop. Just as expected, Mihashi really enjoyed the experience. This made Toa happy. The next morning, on the way to school with Haruki, Toa wished for more opportunities to be able to stay close to Mihashi. Luckily, at the moment, Mihashi replied to Toa's messages. But this seemed to make Haruki a little jealous. After school, Mihashi and Toa walked home together. Mihashi's plan that day was to visit a bookstore. So Toa also wanted to go with her. Suddenly, a car passed by, and Mihashi panicked and ran toward it, leaving Toa behind, confused and alone. Since then, Mihashi stopped replying to Toa's messages. The next morning at school, Toa met Mihashi again, so Mihashi gave him an explanation. It turned out that the person in the car yesterday was her older brother. However, Mihashi seemed to be hiding something from Toa. They didn't even walk home together like before anymore. So right now, Toa doesn't know what to do. But Miharu thinks the reason probably lies with Mihashi's family. Because her family is very strict. Therefore, Mihashi was given a curfew by her family. No matter how important an event at school might be, Mihashi still has to strictly follow the schedule that her parents originally set for her. At this moment, Toa finally understood the situation. He was sure that Mihashi was forcing herself a lot. Suddenly, Toa felt really guilty, because he often spent time with Mihashi. But he hadn't realized this about her. As for Mihashi, she had gone to the library to study until evening. Unexpectedly, when Mihashi was leaving, she saw Toa already waiting at the door. It turned out Toa wanted to talk with Mihashi for a bit. He came to apologize to Mihashi for everything, because Toa hadn't realized that Mihashi was pushing herself like that, which surprised her. But then Mihashi also shared that it was her fault for not telling Toa. At this point, Toa was curious if there was any way he could help Mihashi. However, this was something she had to do on her own. But Mihashi was still very grateful to Toa for that. When they were at school, Toa helped Mihashi with a few small things. But those still helped with her studies. When classes ended, Mihashi ran home first, while Toa stayed sitting in the classroom, because he didn't want to go home. So Haruki saw that and invited Toa to come over to his place. Suddenly, Itokawa came looking for them because she had something to ask. She wanted her friends to help with harvesting ginkgo nuts. Then the cooking club would use them for research and create new and unique dishes. Thanks to everyone's help, Sanagi's group quickly completed their plan. After that, Haruki and Toa went home together. However, this time Toa wanted to go back to his own house. It turned out Toa's mother was waiting for him at home. However, after the two of them talked, they ended up having a small conflict. So Toa left the house at midnight. The next day, he still went to school as usual. But Toa seemed quieter than normal. So Mihashi thought at that moment that perhaps Toa was going through some kind of difficulty. However, Mihashi still didn't know the details of the story. So she waited for Toa after school to talk with him. But at this moment, Toa was overwhelmed by many things. Because so much had happened to him recently. So Toa had fallen into many negative thoughts. He apologized, thinking of himself as someone unreliable. Toa didn't know how much longer he would have to wait for him and Mihashi to finally be together. Suddenly, Toa couldn't control his emotions. He gradually began raising his voice at Mihashi. From that moment on, Mihashi thought that perhaps they would never end up together. During class, Toa became increasingly distracted. Their relationship had now turned extremely awkward. They didn't even dare to look at each other. After school, Haruki and Miharu still went to the convenience store together. At this point, they still didn't know about Toa and Mihashi's situation. Miharu thought that if things continued like this, then the two of them would surely drift apart. Outsiders like Haruki and Miharu also felt troubled, because they didn't know what to do. At that moment, Miharu suddenly came up with an idea. The two of them would organize a party, and Haruki would invite Toa to join. He would also invite Mihashi. However, Toa knew for sure that she wouldn't come, because right now Mihashi was trying to avoid Toa, and he clearly understood that. Since Mihashi always had her family around to supervise her, Toa refused Haruki's invitation, because he was afraid of having to face Mihashi. After that, Toa immediately turned off his phone, which made Haruki extremely frustrated, because he had no idea what to do next. Many days later, the school announced to everyone that their winter break was about to begin, so everyone needed to study hard at home to prepare for the final stretch of their student life. Many days later, at Miharu's house, she organized a Christmas party to have fun with everyone. At that time, Haruki had just arrived, while Mihashi had already come earlier. However, it seemed she couldn't stay long, because Mihashi was about to reach her curfew set by her parents. At this moment, Miharu didn't know whether Toa would make it in time or not. However, Toa was still with his family then. After that, Haruki sent him many messages, because he hoped Toa would seize this opportunity, since this might be Toa's last chance. Haruki didn't want that. The relationship between Toa and Mihashi was about to end like that. So Toa decided to send a message to Mihashi. Unexpectedly, this time she actually replied. Because of that, Toa gave his all to run to Miharu's house as fast as he could. However, it was already time for Mihashi to go home, so she felt regretful, because she couldn't meet Toa yet. Right at that moment, Toa called her. Toa hoped Mihashi would wait a few more minutes. He promised he would arrive right away, because Toa wanted to see Mihashi face to face. No matter how many difficulties there were, Toa would still stay devoted to her. However, when Toa was almost near Mihashi, she had already gotten on the bus, which left him heartbroken, because Toa thought he had lost Mihashi once again. Unexpectedly, at that very moment, Toa heard her voice. This time Mihashi had bravely asked her mother for permission to come home late, because there was something important. Mihashi couldn't go home right away. At that moment, Toa slowly walked toward her. Toa was overjoyed that they finally got to meet, and Mihashi felt the same way. After that, they went to the convenience store together. At that moment, Toa apologized to Mihashi for his childish actions in the past. However, Mihashi also admitted part of the fault, because she had always wanted to avoid trouble, but that unintentionally made things worse. In the present moment, Mihashi only wanted to be acknowledged that this was her true self. Mihashi thought she was strange, since she was always under her family's control. However, Toa understood that everything Mihashi's parents did was only because they wanted the best for her. But now everything had already been resolved, and Toa was very happy about that. At this moment, Toa confessed that he always thought about Mihashi. Every adorable or angry action of Mihashi made Toa miss her even more. Even though those things seemed small, they were truly very important to Toa, and it was Mihashi who helped him realize that. Mihashi also had similar thoughts. Thanks to Toa, she had been able to change herself, and realized Toa's importance. In the end, the two of them were officially together. After that, Toa informed Haruki about the situation, so they both breathed a sigh of relief. A while later, when Haruki was about to leave, unexpectedly, Miharu had prepared a gift for him beforehand, which made Haruki extremely surprised. Their relationship now also became better, and so the vacation came to an end. Today was the first day everyone returned to school. Everyone finally got to see each other again. Toa and Mihashi became more and more affectionate, which made Haruki feel chills down his spine. After he saw them together, when it was time for Haruki to practice at the club, it turned out he was still keeping the lucky charm that Miharu had given him back during the school sports festival. Of course, he deeply cherished anything related to Miharu. Meanwhile, she was in the library with Mihashi. At that moment, Miharu felt very jealous of Mihashi's current love. Suddenly, she announced that Haruki would soon be participating in the upcoming sports tournament. However, Miharu didn't know anything about this, which surprised Mihashi. She thought that Haruki would tell Miharu first, but it turned out that wasn't the case. After school, Miharu was at the convenience store. At that moment, Haruki also arrived. After Miharu found out that Haruki would participate in the sports tournament, she immediately cheered him on. The next day, Haruki continued practicing without rest, while Miharu waited for him outside. Suddenly, she had some urgent matter, so Miharu had to go home early. Right then, Toa happened to be passing by, so the two of them arranged to meet at the convenience store. Toa knew that in this sports tournament, Haruki would probably face a lot of pressure, since it was his first time participating. At that moment, Toa came up with a perfect plan, because it was a chance for Haruki to confess to Miharu. After all, nothing was better than having the one you like cheer for you in a match. However, Haruki still didn't dare invite Miharu to watch, because he was still too nervous. Later that night, Toa's mother forgot something at home, so he brought it to the hospital for her. Suddenly, Toa ran into Miharu at the hospital as well. The next morning at school, Toa told Haruki about what happened the night before. Even today, Miharu was absent from school, so Toa wanted Haruki to call and check on her, but Haruki still didn't dare to do that. When night came, at that moment, Mihashi found out that Miharu had actually been sick for several days, which made Haruki extremely worried, but he still stubbornly refused to call Miharu. However, Mihashi also couldn't get in touch with her. A whole week passed, yet Miharu still hadn't returned to class, so Mihashi was also very worried. As for Miharu, she was alone at the convenience store. It seemed Miharu was waiting for Haruki. However, he was lying at home reading his childhood book. At that moment, Toa came over to Haruki's house to hang out, so the two of them had more time to talk. Recently, Haruki had been feeling strange emotions. Because of that, he couldn't focus on swimming, which gave Haruki a terrible headache. It turned out Toa had once gone through the same thing, since he too had been distracted by many things. However, Haruki couldn't explain this situation. Miharu never really changed, but Haruki felt that there was something different about her. So at this moment, Haruki gradually became helpless, because of his own chaotic emotions. At that point, Toa thought what Haruki needed to do right now was to clarify his relationship with Miharu. Because Haruki still hadn't confessed to Miharu, she might think that the two of them only saw each other as friends. As for Miharu, her mother said that next week the hospital results would come out, and Miharu would be able to return to school. At the convenience store, Haruki was hesitating to text Miharu. Unexpectedly, she suddenly appeared, because Miharu knew for sure that Haruki would be there. At that moment, Haruki immediately asked about her health. Luckily, everything was fine, so Haruki finally felt at ease. As expected, the convenience store was Miharu's favorite place. Even though it was just an ordinary shop, with nothing too special, this was still the place where many stories began. Suddenly, Miharu thought to herself that every time she stood next to Haruki, she always felt as if she was standing next to the person she loved. Of course, no one else knew about this, because it was only at the convenience store that Miharu got to see that person. No one else, it was Haruki. The story about the boyfriend Miharu had imagined finally came true. From the very first moment Miharu met Haruki, she had imagined many adorable scenes. On the way home together, Miharu confessed this to Haruki. After that, she thought she was strange, but Haruki immediately denied it. At that moment, he was about to say something to Miharu. However, Miharu seemed afraid. She didn't have the courage to listen further. But Haruki kept on sharing, because he thought this would be a good chance to express the feelings inside him. The time when Haruki couldn't meet Miharu made him feel very restless. Whatever Haruki thought of, it was always Miharu. She was always in Haruki's mind, even though he didn't know where it all began. Later Haruki found the answer. However, just as Haruki was about to confess to Miharu, she suddenly fainted. At that moment, Haruki's mind went into panic. After that, he quickly took Miharu to the hospital. Fortunately, Miharu's condition later stabilized, So Haruki and Toa went home to rest. Before the two of them went to sleep, Haruki confided in Toa, saying that he had confessed his feelings to Miharu. However, Haruki didn't know what he was doing now. He thought he was only worrying about himself, without thinking about Miharu, so Haruki felt extremely guilty. But Toa believed he was just overthinking. The next morning, Haruki got ready early to visit Miharu in the hospital. When he arrived, he unexpectedly met Miharu's mother. So the two of them went together to see her. However, Miharu still hadn't woken up. So her mother thanked Haruki at that moment for bringing Miharu to the hospital the previous day. Then Miharu's mother revealed that it might be because Miharu had been a bit stressed lately. Since birth, Miharu had always had a very weak heart, so her doctor had suggested surgery. Therefore, the whole family was considering this matter. However, Miharu still wanted to wait for some time. A while later, after Haruki went home, he lay there and imagined Miharu for a long time. Miharu's mind currently had too many thoughts running through it. The next morning at school, Haruki's spirits noticeably dropped. At that moment, he couldn't focus on his studies at all, nor on anything happening around him. As for Sanagi's group, they had just learned about Miharu's illness, so everyone wanted to visit her. In the evening, Haruki ran to the convenience store to buy a few things. After that, he visited Miharu as usual. Toa and Mihashi were also on their way there. At that moment, the two of them happened to meet Sanagi. After a while of talking, Toa realized that Sanagi understood Miharu's condition very well. This made Toa suspicious. Although Sanagi didn't have much to say at that moment, he was willing to share. It turned out that they had met each other at the hospital when they were children. So they used to play together when there were no adults around. As for Haruki, while he was observing Miharu, her mother came in, so later the two of them went outside to have some water. Suddenly, Miharu's mother noticed that Haruki looked very similar to Masora's childhood friend. It turned out that Masora and Miharu were twin sisters, and Masora was the one who had played with Haruki when he was a child. However, Masora later became seriously ill, and she did not survive. After hearing the whole story, Haruki thought about many things. When he got home, Haruki thought about Miharu before the sports festival took place. The words he had said to Miharu were actually meant for Masora. Perhaps that was why Miharu had left. Just then, Toa arrived at Haruki's house. While he was deep in thought, for Haruki, his childhood friend was an important memory. However, the person Haruki dared to confess his feelings to and dared to experience things he had never done before was Miharu. At that moment, Haruki was very sure of his feelings. Then Toa advised that when Miharu woke up, Haruki should bravely confess his feelings to her. The next morning at school, Haruki had become more positive. He focused on the tasks he needed to do. In the evening, Haruki still visited Miharu as usual. Unexpectedly, she had truly woken up. At this moment, Haruki had prepared the things Miharu liked to eat, because he had prepared them earlier at the convenience store. Suddenly, Miharu burst into laughter, with such a large amount of food. At this time, Toa and Mihashi had also arrived in full. Everyone was happy to see Miharu getting better. Even Miharu's mother felt the same. However, she advised Miharu to undergo surgery soon, because it would help her feel better. Afterwards, Miharu could return to a normal life. When everyone went home, on the way, Toa didn't expect Miharu to skip school. But Haruki knew that she had no other choice. Suddenly, Haruki recalled the earlier moment. It turned out he had seen Miharu shed tears. Miharu seemed very lonely by herself in that room. So, on the way home, Haruki kept thinking about that moment. Surely, Miharu had been suppressing those emotions for a long time. But Haruki didn't know what to say at that moment. At this time, Toa gave him a piece of advice. The best way was to speak directly to Miharu, not to let her avoid things after those tears anymore. The next day, Haruki returned to the hospital. Afterwards, he and Miharu sat together for a long while. At this moment, Miharu said that she would only have 1 week left to stay here, because Miharu was preparing to leave this place for surgery. So afterwards, Haruki spent all his free time going to the hospital to be with Miharu, so that she wouldn't feel lonely by herself. However, Miharu still misunderstood that the person Haruki had met before and the person he cared about was Masora, not Miharu. However, Haruki realized this, which made Miharu quite surprised. Taking this opportunity, Haruki confessed that the girl he had always admired was none other than Miharu, the one he was talking to right now. Suddenly, Miharu became afraid of the upcoming surgery. That was also the reason why Misora hadn't returned home. So Miharu feared that she would never see everyone again. Because of that, Miharu rejected Haruki's confession. Afterwards, Haruki ran off under the heavy rain. Meanwhile, Miharu cried loudly in her room. When Haruki lay on his bed, he was still thinking about it. The next morning, Haruki practiced swimming as usual. Afterwards, he remained persistent. Haruki ran very fast to Miharu's place. As for Mihashi, she didn't know what was happening between them. However, Toa knew clearly, Haruki definitely wouldn't give up easily, because he had been pursuing Miharu all this time. Toa believed that Haruki was that kind of person. By chance, one evening, Miharu saw Haruki waiting in the lobby, so she decided to run down. The two of them went to the convenience store. At this moment, Haruki announced that he had secured a spot on the swimming team. So Miharu was very happy about that. However, perhaps next week, Miharu wouldn't be able to come cheer for Haruki. But Haruki only hoped that he could see Miharu again soon after her discharge. At this moment, Haruki affirmed that he would do his best. He would definitely win. Therefore, Miharu also had to do her best. The next morning, Toa and Mihashi came to see Miharu off. Because Haruki was still busy training, he couldn't come here. However, Haruki asked Toa to deliver this important book to Miharu for him. Inside the book, there was a letter. Haruki said that it was thanks to it that he came to like swimming. And Haruki was determined to swim a lot so that he could go even further. That book had given Haruki a special motivation. And now he was giving it to Miharu, because he wanted her to have that motivation too. At this moment, Miharu deeply cherished this meaningful gift. Suddenly, the two of them went together to a place. Not surprisingly, they were at the convenience store. This place truly felt like a destined place. At this moment, Haruki successfully confessed to Miharu. And that was the place where their love story began. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support Oni-chan in the upcoming videos. Thank you all for watching. Lots of love.